The movie begins with a woman named Catherine, who is haunted by the tragic memory of her eldest son, Nicky, who died in a car accident at the age of 16. Catherine remains unable to move past his death and has preserved Nicky's room as it was, forbidding her younger son, Brady, from entering. This leaves Brady feeling rejected and unloved, creating a strain in their relationship. On the other hand, we are introduced to Walt, a schoolteacher who is approached by one of his students, Sherry. She seeks his help with her coursework, but it becomes clear that Sherry is drawn to Walt, and he seems to share her feelings. In addition to being a student, Sherry also works as a weather reporter for a news channel, giving her a dual presence in Walt's life. In another storyline, a young man named Jordy is shown serving a sentence in prison for stealing a car. After completing his punishment, he is released and picked up outside by his father, Carl, who is waiting for him. However, the relationship between Carl and Jordy is tense and full of unresolved issues. When they return home, Carl gives Jordy an ultimatum: he has 1 week to find a job or he will be kicked out. Jordy's stepmother, Elise, tries to be kind and welcoming, but Jordy treats her coldly, suspecting that she is only with Carl for his money. Elise, undeterred, continues her attempts to connect, but Jordy avoids her. Meanwhile, Walt discovers a newspaper clipping about Nicky's car accident and decides to keep it for reasons that are not immediately clear. Walt later visits his brother Dennis, who has been suffering from severe depression and has not stepped out of his apartment for 2 years. Dennis, consumed by his mental health struggles, lives a life of isolation, but Walt hopes to help him recover. On the other side, Walt, who is battling his own inner demons, visits Carl, who works as a psychiatrist, for guidance. Walt confesses to Carl that he caused Nicky's accident while driving under the influence. He reveals that his whole family, including Dennis, was in the car with him, and during the collision, he saw a man wearing a basketball jersey near the scene. Carl listens intently, realizing with shock that he was the man in the jersey. The session ends abruptly as Carl becomes too overwhelmed to continue, leaving Walt puzzled and unsettled. Catherine's grief is shown as she visits Nicky's grave often and cries alone in his room. These moments highlight her love for Nicky and her inability to move on from his death. In contrast, Jordy struggles to adjust to life outside of prison. He faces rejection while job hunting due to his criminal record but eventually gets hired at a pizza shop. At home, a tense situation arises when Elise inadvertently sees Jordy in a compromising moment, further straining their already fragile relationship. Jordy reconnects with an old high school friend, Melissa, who invites him to a party. During their conversation, Melissa mentions having recently seen Catherine and encourages Jordy to meet her, hinting at an unknown connection between them. Walt's marriage to his wife, Abby, is under strain as he grows emotionally distant and becomes preoccupied with Sherry, often watching her weather reports on TV. Abby, feeling neglected and unloved, decides to leave and stay with her sister. Although Walt attempts to stop her from leaving, Abby refuses, making her dissatisfaction with their relationship clear. Shortly afterward, Walt starts an affair with Sherry, deepening the rift in his marriage. On the other side, Jordy and Elise begin a secret relationship when Carl is not at home, creating a dangerous dynamic. At the same time, Jordy and Melissa grow closer, but their developing bond is complicated by Elise's presence and interference. Dennis begins to show signs of recovery when Walt arranges for Sylvie, a woman Dennis has been speaking to over the phone, to visit. Initially reluctant, Dennis agrees to talk to Sylvie from behind a closed door. Her understanding and patience help Dennis feel more comfortable, and the two share meaningful conversations. Walt, seeing his brother's progress, feels hopeful for Dennis's recovery. The next scene shows Walt and Sherry having a conversation. During this, Sherry tells Walt that a few years ago, after he had a car accident, she came to interview him, but he might not remember it now. Walt does not like hearing this and, feeling upset, decides to leave. Meanwhile, Jordy is working when his manager tells him to work faster, which irritates Jordy. Frustrated with the manager's constant demands, Jordy decides to quit his job. He goes home with Melissa to gather his belongings so he can leave for good. Elise tries to speak to him, but she is annoyed because Jordy is with Melissa. Jordy doesn't pay attention to her frustrations and leaves with Melissa despite her protests. That night, when Jordy is unable to sleep, he decides to call Catherine. The next day, we see Jordy and Catherine talking. In this conversation, it is revealed that Nikki was also in the car that Jordy stole and went to jail for, but the idea of stealing the car was Jordy's and not Nikki's. After they stole the car, Jordy and Nikki were involved in a car accident caused by Walt, who was driving while intoxicated. However, at the time, neither of them realized that Walt was responsible for the accident. This candid conversation about Nikki allows Jordy and Catherine to let go of their guilt, and the burden that had weighed heavily on their hearts for years is finally lifted. Catherine later burns all of Nikki's belongings, coming to terms with the fact that she cannot change her son's death. Accepting that it's time to move on, Catherine approaches her younger son, Brady, and suggests that they go on a vacation together. Since Nikki's death, Catherine had neglected Brady, but now she wants to reconnect with him. Brady feels overjoyed, happy to finally have his mother's attention. On the other side, Dennis leaves the house to meet Sylvie, someone he hasn't seen in 2 years. This prompts Walt to reflect on his mistakes, and he decides to apologize to Catherine. However, Catherine tells Walt that she already knew he was responsible for the accident that caused Nikki's death. Overcome with anger and grief, she beats him repeatedly before leaving in tears, taking Brady with her. Meanwhile, Jordy returns home and tries to speak to Elise, but Carl suddenly appears and starts attacking him after discovering Jordy and Elise's affair. Already upset with his father's actions, Jordy retaliates, and a fight breaks out between father and son. The scuffle becomes intense, but Elise intervenes just in time to stop them. Unfortunately, Carl gets seriously injured during the fight, so Elise rushes him to the hospital. In the final moments of the movie, we see Dennis having dinner with Sylvie, while Catherine appears genuinely happy for the first time in years, suggesting a new beginning for her and those around her.